Hello, my name's Tim Congdon. I'm the economic spokesman for the UK Independence Party. I'm present in Bournemouth, and I'm about to speak to a public meeting with the theme Better Off Out. Better off out of the European Union, that is. We're going to have, almost certainly, at some point in the next few years, probably before the 2015 general election, a referendum on our membership of the European Union. And it's very important that we in UKIP are well prepared for that to happen. So I want to talk the next few minutes about how we should prepare for the referendum, and in particular about what kind of question we want asked. There is a very serious danger that we're going to be asked, when I say we, I mean the British people, are going to be asked a bogus question. Instead of being asked whether we want to be in or out of the European Union, we're going to be asked whether we want to be in or half in, so that the option of leaving is never really put in front of the people. We had a report from a think tank called Open Europe a few days ago, and they set out various options for Britain in the 21st century. They said we could stay in the European Union as at present, as a full member, putting up with whatever Brussels throws at us. So we carry on as now. Or then there are these other options. There's the Swiss option, where we have the same kind of arrangement with Switzerland. They're not in the European Union, but have all sorts of arrangements with their neighbours, who of course all are in the European Union. Then there's the Norwegian option, where they belong to the common market, and actually pay some money to the European Union, but are again not strictly members of it. And then finally, there is, to my mind, is the true option of leaving altogether. Now, what I want to do very quickly is to say that we must insist on an in-out referendum, none of this half-in nonsense. And I want the next few minutes just to explain what that means. You get this question crops up, can we survive outside the European Union? I'm going to say a few things now about the kind of world that we've lived in. When I say we, I mean in this case, humanity, all of the people on the planet, that we've lived in since 1945. And then I want to say we must have an in-out referendum, and we must stand to get out of the European Union altogether. There was a famous meeting in August 1941 on a British battleship in a harbour in Newfoundland, just off Canada, between Churchill and Roosevelt. And they agreed something called the Atlantic Charter. Of course, it was in the darkest days of the Second World War, but in fact, both Roosevelt and Churchill knew that the outcome almost certainly was going to be an Allied victory, because they knew the figures for aircraft production, and they knew perfectly well that the Allies outnumbered Germany 3 or 4 to 1. They knew we were going to win, even at that stage. And they put together a charter to determine the basis of international politics after the Second World War. And there were 2 key items I want to focus on. One was that nations had the right to self-determination, they had the right to independence, and the big nations were not to discriminate against small nations, and also critically, Britain and America agreed there should be no territorial acquisitions after the Second World War by either of those 2 powers, and they took it for granted that they could guarantee the peace for most of the world. Though, of course, what happened in Eastern Europe was something went wrong there, with obviously Russia taking much of Eastern Europe after the war. What that meant was that as small countries, the citizens of small countries could feel as safe in the post-war world as the citizens of large countries. They would not be invaded, that they would not be subject to the loss of life and property as foreign troops took control of their lands. And that is the kind of world we've lived in since 1945. Most nations do not belong to the European Union. This idea that membership of the European Union is compulsory, or that somehow we're doing something very daring to leave the European Union, is nonsense. There are about 195 members of the United Nations. 27 nations belong to the European Union. You can see rather obviously that 160 nations don't belong to the European Union, and they're fine, all right? They're not threatened. They trade happily with other neighbours, with their neighbours. People, South America, Asia, they don't belong to the European Union. Australia, Canada, New Zealand don't belong to the European Union. Why do we need to belong to the European Union? We don't need to belong at all. There is, at this point, just mentioned that I made these, in my view, therefore, this question, can we survive outside the European Union, is an idiotic question. Okay? It's an idiotic question. Most countries don't belong to the European Union, and are quite all right. We don't need to belong at all. And it's just a question of the costs against the benefits. That's it. And frankly, the costs are far higher than the benefits we get from our membership. I want, just before I finish, to say that you may think that what I'm saying is in a way rather obvious. Most countries don't belong to the European Union, why should we? The countries that are outside produce about 80% of world output. You take Britain out of the European Union. They dominate the world, not the European Union. We don't need to belong at all. Nevertheless, we get Mandels, 2003, an article in the Sunday Mirror. Staying out of the euro, I'm quoting now, staying out of the euro will mean progressive economic isolation for Britain. Isolation for Britain? For heaven's sake, Lord Mandelson, America, Australia, Canada, New Zealand don't belong to the European Union. Are they isolated? What utter nonsense. The same word was used last year by Nick Clegg on the Today programme in these claims about how we must belong to this market in order that we meet. Just again, quote, this is Nick Clegg now. Leaving the EU would be leaving the world's largest borderless single market with 500 million consumers right on our doorsteps. Isolation, that's his word, costs jobs, costs growth, and so on. Again, I must ask, are America, Canada, New Zealand, and so on, are they isolated? Please, there are over 6,000 million people in the world. That's a market much larger than the European market. That's what we should think about in the 21st century. So, of course, Britain can survive outside the European Union. And if we get this kind of thing thrown at us in the debate leading up to the referendum, we must know how to answer it. And the answer is that most of the world doesn't belong to this failing area, this area that actually is keeping us back. And we should join the rest of the world that does fine without the wretched European Union. Thank you.